Hey, what's up guys? It's Chris from Daily Tech, and this is episode 2 of a 4-part series exploring an amazing PS4 Pro setup. So episode 1 was all about unboxing and getting things set up, so check that out if you haven't already. But in this episode, we're gonna be doing some testing and demos of some great games in different modes to give you an idea of how they work, like Rise of the Tomb Raider, Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, and Batman Arkham VR. And in a later episode, I'm gonna be testing Battlefield 1 on both the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One S, so stay tuned for that. But this episode isn't just about tests and demos, it's also gonna be covering some of the settings that I'm using because I always get a bunch of questions about that. But just a quick note before we get started, any of the stuff that you see in this episode that you might want to buy, I've got the links for those down in the description below. And also I'm giving away a PS4 Pro, so make sure to enter that giveaway. Again, the link is down in the description. So what's kind of at the heart of this setup is the PS4 Pro paired with the Samsung KS8000, which is a perfect companion because it displays 4K and HDR content. Now on this particular setup, it's really important to go into your settings on the TV and enable the HDMI UHD color for the specific HDMI port or ports that you've got an HDR device hooked up to. You're also gonna wanna enable game mode, and yes, HDR does work in game mode. Increase your backlight to max, set the color space to auto, and set the smart LED to high. Now, as I was getting set up, I ran into a really annoying issue related to the PSVR and HDR. Basically, if you've got the PSVR hooked up, you're not gonna be able to use the HDR and vice versa. So going through the PSVR's processing unit screws up the HDR. But as soon as I did a direct connection and bypassed that PSVR processing unit, then the HDR started working. Okay, so on your PlayStation, you wanna go into your video output settings and set the resolution to 2160p, set the HDR and deep color output to automatic. But the settings on the PS4 Pro get a little bit more complicated on a game-by-game basis because Sony left it up to the developers how to best utilize the new console. So some games might get better graphics, some might get better performance, and some might get HDR, but it's not gonna be the same across the board. Now keep in mind for these demos, even though I'm filming in 4K, which you should turn up if you haven't already on YouTube, you're not gonna really be able to see and experience things how they really are and how I'm seeing them. So we're gonna start things off with Rise of the Tomb Raider because it does something that's really interesting. It gives players the option of switching between 3 different graphic modes. So in the in-game options under Enhanced Fidelity, you can switch between the following 3 options: 4K resolution, high frame rate, and enhanced visuals. High frame rate provides for smoother gameplay if you just want to run through things as quickly as possible with seamless controls. Enriched Visuals turns up the graphical features of the game for a lusher and more realistic experience in 30 frames per second, so lighting, multipass rendering, texture shading, reflections, density of pixels, density of particle effects, all that stuff gets turned on. And 4K resolution, that's pretty obvious. You'll just be seeing more details that would have otherwise disappeared. Now, one thing that's really cool about this is that switching between these game modes actually happens in real time. So I actually really love what the developer did here. These in-game options are really awesome. This is the right way to handle a PS4 Pro game if you ask me. But in all honesty, it can be tricky at times to tell the difference between the 4K mode and the enhanced visuals mode unless you're really looking, and most of the time, you're just playing. All right, so next up, let's take a look at Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, which has been remastered through a patch for the PS4 Pro. Now in this case, the developers took a totally different route than did the developers for Rise of the Tomb Raider. There's no 4K option here. Instead, you're gonna get bumped up to 1440p from 1080p on the regular PS4. And apparently it was the developers' goal to provide more detail in textures and smoother, sharper edges that better distinguish the characters, effects, and the environment. But what it lacks in 4K, it does try to make up for in the HDR department with a drastically expanded color range and brightness. And the overall effect, I have to say, is really nice because I've said it before, HDR can often feel like a bigger enhancement than 4K. All right, so now it's on to Batman Arkham VR, which is actually the first serious VR game I've ever tried. Honestly, this is a pretty awesome game, and the PSVR experience is pretty mind-blowing for the first time. And I'm gonna talk about that more in another video, But suffice it to say, this game has only okay graphics, and that is due to the PSVR's limitations. And also I have to note that the gameplay moves along kind of slowly because you're playing Batman the detective, not Batman the ninja. But still, this is a really fun game that I really didn't want to put down. All right, so there you go with some settings as well as some game demos, and there's a lot more to come. Still, I'm gonna be doing my reviews as well as a comparison between the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One S, so stay tuned for that. But don't forget to enter the PS4 Pro giveaway, and all the product links are down in the description below. And don't forget to follow @DailyTech on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. And stay tuned for the next episode, which will be starting right now. Later.